As the clock struck midnight, a shiver ran through the mansion, and the candlelight flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows against the grand walls. Hercule Poirot stood before the magnificent portrait of Countess Talvikki, its eyes seemingly following him, a sense of unease settling over him. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the empty hall, as though something, or someone, was drawing near. The mystery was about to begin, and with it, the truth hidden in the very heart of the portrait. But would Poirot uncover it before the darkness claimed another victim? Chapter 1. The Invitation to the Mansion. The morning fog rolled over the French countryside as Hercule Poirot's train gently pulled into the small village of Le Mesnil. Known for its untouched charm and distant beauty, the village was far removed from the bustling streets of Paris. Yet, to Poirot, this quiet haven held an intriguing mystery, a mystery that would lead him to the grand and mysterious mansion of Countess Talvikki. Poirot adjusted his coat collar, stepping out of the carriage with his usual air of quiet dignity. He had arrived not for an investigation, but for what he thought would be a peaceful retreat from the chaos of the world. However, his plans were quickly interrupted when he received an unexpected letter. The letter, sealed with the Countess's family crest, was from Marguerite de Montreuil, the niece of the late Countess Talvikki. In her elegantly penned words, she invited Poirot to the mansion, requesting his expertise in a matter both delicate and urgent. The mansion of Countess Talvikki. The mansion, perched on a hillside overlooking the village, was a grand structure, its Gothic spires piercing the sky like ancient sentinels guarding long-buried secrets. Its weathered stone walls bore the weight of centuries, and its once pristine windows now seemed to stare down with an unsettling, watchful gaze. It was a house that held history in its very bones. As Poirot made his way up the gravel path, the thick fog began to lift, revealing the sprawling grounds. A large iron gate swung open, seemingly by its own accord, as though it too was anticipating the arrival of its guest. Marguerite met him at the entrance. She was a striking woman in her mid-30s, her dark hair neatly tied back, and her green eyes reflected a sense of both beauty and sorrow. Her demeanor was polite but tense, as though the weight of something unspoken hung in the air. "Mon cher Poirot," she greeted him, her voice soft but with a hint of urgency. "I am so grateful you could come. There is something terribly wrong with the house, with the portrait. I do not know who else to turn to." Poirot studied her closely, taking in the slight tremor in her hand as she gestured toward the grand entrance. "Mademoiselle, you are troubled. Please, lead me to where I may see what has caused you such unease." The portrait. Inside the mansion, the air was heavy with the scent of aged wood and dust. The walls were adorned with exquisite paintings and antique furnishings, each one seemingly telling its own tale. Yet it was one painting that drew Poirot's attention, far more than any other. A large portrait of Countess Talvikki dominated the grand hallway. It was the centerpiece of the room, framed in gold, with intricate patterns that gleamed in the low light. The Countess was depicted in a grand gown of midnight blue, her face solemn and regal. Yet there was something strange about the eyes of the painting, something almost alive. As Poirot approached the canvas, he couldn't help but feel the faintest unease, as if the Countess herself were watching him, scrutinizing his every move. Marguerite stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The portrait. It is said to be cursed. My uncle, the current owner of the estate, is obsessed with it. Since we moved it to the center of the hall, strange things have happened. Fires, unexplained noises, objects falling off shelves. It is as if the Countess's spirit haunts this house." Poirot studied the painting for a long moment. "The portrait is indeed striking," he said, his voice calm. "But what I see, mademoiselle, is a painting, a work of art, nothing more." Marguerite's eyes widened. "You do not believe in the curse?" Poirot turned to her, his mustache twitching with his characteristic calmness. "I do not believe in curses, mademoiselle. But I do believe in human nature, in greed, in jealousy, and in secrets. Those are the true forces behind such tales. The family's history." As the day wore on, Poirot settled into a large study filled with books and old documents. Marguerite, now slightly more at ease, joined him with a collection of letters and family history. She explained that her late aunt, Countess Talvikki, had been a woman of great wealth and mystery. Though she was well known for her beauty and grace, there were rumors of scandal that surrounded her life. The Countess had been a patron of the arts, commissioning works from some of the most renowned artists of her time. But there was one artist in particular who seemed to haunt her legacy: Sébastien de Léon. A man obsessed with her beauty, de Léon had painted several portraits of the Countess, each one more intense and vivid than the last. But there was one painting, a painting that no one had seen, that was said to capture the true essence of the Countess. "That is the painting I suspect holds the key to all of this," Marguerite said softly. "It disappeared years ago. No one knows where it is now." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the details in the letters. "And the Countess? Did she have any enemies?" Marguerite hesitated. "Yes," she confessed. There were whispers of a rival artist, de Léon, who had been enamored with her. He would have done anything to claim her legacy, her wealth, her fame. Poirot took a deep breath. "Then, mademoiselle, it seems we are dealing not with a curse, but with something far more insidious: human ambition, envy, and revenge." A visit to the study. As the evening descended, Poirot continued his inspection of the mansion. He was shown to the Countess's personal study, where she had spent countless hours. The walls were lined with books on art and history, but it was the desk that caught his attention. A collection of sketches, each of the Countess's portraits, was spread across the surface. The final sketch was of her face, as captured by Sébastien de Léon. But there was something unsettling about it. The eyes, unlike any other portrait, seemed to follow him. The details in the drawing were uncanny, too perfect, too intimate. Poirot picked up the sketch carefully, examining it as the weight of his thoughts began to form a clearer picture. He had heard enough of the legend surrounding the portrait. Now, it was time to get to the truth. Chapter 2. The Mysterious History of Countess Talvikki. The morning light filtered through the thick curtains of the mansion, casting a soft glow over the ancient tapestries that lined the walls. The grandeur of Countess Talvikki's estate was undeniable, but it was a grandeur that carried with it an air of decay, a sense that the mansion's best days were long behind it. Hercule Poirot, in his quiet, methodical way, made his way down the grand staircase, his shoes clicking softly on the marble floor as he descended into the heart of the mystery. Marguerite had invited him for breakfast in the drawing room, where she hoped to shed light on the family history that seemed entwined with the haunting portrait. As Poirot entered the room, he found her sitting by the large bay window, gazing out over the grounds. She looked every bit the part of a woman weighed down by the heavy mantle of her family's legacy. "Mon cher Poirot," she greeted him, her voice a mixture of weariness and resolve. "You've seen the portrait. I know it looks harmless, perhaps, but it is far from that. Let me tell you about my aunt, Countess Talvikki. Perhaps then you will understand why I am so desperate for your help." Poirot nodded, settling himself into the chair across from her. His mind was already processing the details he had gathered, but he knew he needed to understand the Countess's history before moving forward. He gestured for Marguerite to continue. The rise of Countess Talvikki. Marguerite began her tale, her words heavy with the weight of history. "My aunt was born in the early 1800s, a woman of extraordinary beauty and ambition. The Talvikki family was well established, but it was her mother's fortune that truly elevated the family's status. Countess Talvikki grew up surrounded by wealth, elegance, and the finest artists of her time." She paused, her eyes drifting to the portrait of the Countess on the wall. Poirot noted the shift in her expression, a mixture of sorrow and something darker. An undercurrent of fear, perhaps, that had yet to fully surface. "My aunt was not only beautiful, but she was also an intelligent and driven woman," Marguerite continued. "She loved art, literature, and fine culture. It was said that she had a particular talent for painting, though she never pursued it seriously. Instead, she became a muse, a subject for some of the greatest artists of the day." Poirot listened carefully, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the armrest. "And these artists, mademoiselle, were they all men who admired her beauty?" Marguerite gave a slight nod, though her gaze remained distant. "Yes, most of them were. But there was one artist who stood out above the rest, Sébastien de Léon. He was a painter of great skill, but also a man with an insatiable desire for recognition. He became obsessed with my aunt, and his obsession grew over the years." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "An obsession, you say?" Marguerite's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes. He painted her numerous times, each portrait more intimate than the last. It is said that he captured her soul, that he saw something in her no one else could. And in some ways, that is what drew her to him. She was fascinated by his passion for her, but she never returned his affections in the way he wished." Poirot's sharp mind began to connect the dots. A passionate obsession, and yet no return of feelings on the Countess's part. And what happened next? The rivalry and the disappearance. Marguerite took a deep breath before continuing, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. It was during the peak of their relationship that things started to unravel. Sébastien de Léon became increasingly possessive, and his work began to reflect his growing obsession with my aunt. The final portrait he created was different. It was unlike anything else he had ever done. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And why was it different, mademoiselle?" Marguerite's voice quivered slightly as she spoke. "Because it was said to capture more than just her likeness. It was rumored that he had painted her true soul, the essence of her being. A painting so intimate, so revealing, that it was impossible to look at without feeling as though one had glimpsed something deeply personal, something hidden." "Ah," Poirot murmured thoughtfully. "A portrait that revealed not just the outward appearance, but the innermost nature of the Countess. And this, mademoiselle, is the portrait that disappeared. Yes, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Shortly after it was completed, my aunt grew frightened of it. She claimed that it seemed to change, to move in some way. Her fears grew to the point where she locked it away in a room at the back of the mansion. It was never shown to anyone. Poirot's mind raced. A portrait that seemed to change, to possess an almost supernatural quality. This was no ordinary painting, and it seemed clear that something was amiss. He turned to Marguerite with a piercing gaze. "And the painting, mademoiselle? It disappeared, you say. Do you have any idea who might have taken it?" Marguerite hesitated, her face tightening. "I believe it was taken by someone close to my aunt, someone who knew of its power. But no one ever spoke of it openly. My uncle, my aunt's husband, was the first to suggest it had been stolen, but he was obsessed with it in his own way. His obsession with art, with preserving her legacy, was perhaps as dangerous as de Leon's. The last days of Countess Talvikki Poirot's interest was piqued further as Marguerite began to describe the last days of the Countess's life. In the months before her death, Aunt Talvikki grew increasingly reclusive. She became frail, paranoid, convinced that de Leon's portrait was still watching her. She would speak of it at night, saying that the eyes of the portrait were following her everywhere. Poirot's expression grew, thoughtful. And did she ever speak of de Leon himself during this time? Marguerite nodded, her eyes filled with both sorrow and anger. She said that he had betrayed her, that his obsession with her had gone too far. But what could she have meant by that? She never gave a full explanation. And then, one day, she was found dead in her study. A heart attack, they said. "How convenient," Poirot muttered. A heart attack, but no explanation for the cause of her death. Marguerite's lips pressed into a thin line. "Some say it was the painting, the curse of it, the weight of it on her mind. But I believe there was something more." Chapter 3. A strange atmosphere. The mansion had fallen into a quiet lull by the time Poirot retired to his room for the evening. The heavy silence of the estate was both soothing and oppressive, a peculiar tension hanging in the air. As Poirot lay in his bed, his mind raced with the details he had learned from Marguerite. The portrait of Countess Talvikki was at the center of this mystery. But what did it truly conceal? What power did it hold? His eyes flickered open to the faint creak of floorboards in the hallway outside his room. The house seemed alive, with sounds, subtle yet unnerving, the crackle of distant fireplaces, the gust of wind rattling the windows, and, occasionally, the low murmurs of voices. But it was the unease in the air that troubled Poirot the most. There was something in this mansion that did not belong, something that stirred the shadows. The next morning, Poirot was up early, determined to continue his investigation. He was greeted by Marguerite in the grand hall, her face pale with exhaustion. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed him a cup of tea, her nerves plainly visible. There was something in her eyes that suggested she had not slept well, though she tried to mask it with a forced smile. "Good morning, mademoiselle," Poirot said, accepting the tea with his usual politeness. "I trust you are well." Marguerite glanced at the floor, then looked up at him. I don't know how to explain it, but there's something about the house, Poirot. Strange things have been happening. I fear it's not just the portrait, but something more sinister." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Go on, mademoiselle. You have my full attention." The unsettling events. Marguerite led Poirot down the long corridor towards the library, her voice low, almost hesitant. "Ever since my uncle moved the portrait to the center of the hall, we've experienced a series of bizarre occurrences. It started with the smallest things. Objects falling off shelves, books being knocked over when no one was around. Then it grew worse." She paused, glancing over her shoulder, as though checking for an unseen presence. "A week ago, the library caught fire. It was as though the flames appeared from nowhere, and yet no one could explain how it started. We lost valuable books, precious family heirlooms. My uncle was devastated. He still can't make sense of it." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, sipping his tea. "A fire, you say? And how exactly did this fire begin?" Marguerite shook her head, her expression growing more troubled. "The fire department found no evidence of arson or foul play. It was simply inexplicable. It wasn't even a large blaze, but it ravaged part of the library. Some of the books seemed to be deliberately targeted, while others remained untouched. It's as though the fire had a mind of its own." Poirot, ever the skeptic, considered the information. "And what other events have occurred since then?" Marguerite hesitated before speaking again. "Unexplained cold spots, mostly. Areas of the house where it's impossible to keep warm, no matter how much we stoke the fires. There's a particular room near the portrait where the temperature always drops, even on the warmest days." Poirot's sharp gaze moved towards the grand staircase. "These cold spots, mademoiselle, are they located near the portrait, near the heart of the mystery?" "Yes," Marguerite replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "That room, it is where we found the portrait locked away for all those years. And now, since it's been moved, it's as though something stirred, something angry. The shadow of the past." Poirot stood, his eyes scanning the grand hall, pausing for a moment before turning to Marguerite. "I would like to see this room, mademoiselle, if you would be so kind." With a quick nod, Marguerite led him to the back of the mansion, past the older, quieter wings where the servants once lived, until they reached the room she had described. The door, once solid and secure, now hung ajar, as though it had not been closed properly in ages. Poirot took a deep breath, the air around him colder than he had anticipated, and stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the small windows on the far side of the chamber, their glass clouded with age. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with the dusty remnants of a bygone era. But it was the centerpiece of the room, a large wooden table that caught Poirot's attention. It was covered with old documents, papers scattered haphazardly, as though someone had hastily gone through them. Marguerite stepped back, watching Poirot carefully. "This was my aunt's study. Before the portrait was moved, it was locked away in the far corner of this room. But after her death, everything changed." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he examined the room further. His gaze fell upon an old book, its pages yellowed with time. He picked it up, flipping through the pages with ease. "This book," he mused. "It appears to be a journal of some sort. And what's this?" He held up a loose sheet of paper, its edges frayed. The writing was faded, but still legible. It seemed to be a letter, written in haste, possibly by Countess Talvikki herself. Marguerite looked over his shoulder, her face pale. "That's one of the last things she wrote before her death. I believe she was trying to warn someone, maybe herself even." Poirot's fingers ran over the words, his brow furrowing as he pieced together the meaning. It speaks of a curse, but more than that, it mentions betrayal. A betrayal by someone close to her, someone she trusted. A vision in the portrait. As Poirot examined the letter, something caught his eye from across the room. The portrait of Countess Talvikki, hung on the opposite wall, seemed to take on a new life in the dim light. The eyes of the Countess, once passive and lifeless, now appeared to glint with an unsettling awareness. Poirot's gaze locked with the portrait, and for a moment he almost felt as though the Countess were watching him, as if the painting itself was aware of his presence. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "You see it too, don't you?" Marguerite's voice trembled beside him. Poirot slowly turned away from the portrait, his mind processing the images he had just witnessed. "Mademoiselle," he began, his tone calm but firm, "I do not believe in curses or the supernatural. But I do believe in something far more dangerous, human frailty and greed. There is something here, something hidden in plain sight, and it has more to do with the people involved than with any portrait or painting. A house on the edge." As they left the room, Marguerite led Poirot back to the main hall. The atmosphere in the mansion was thick with tension, the air heavy with the unseen forces at work. Poirot, however, had gained a clearer picture of the situation. While the portrait and its power were indeed part of the mystery, they were only a symptom of a far greater, more insidious problem. His sharp mind turned over the facts once again. A portrait that seemed to move. A cursed object, according to family legend. A troubled family history, full of betrayal, obsession, and dark secrets. It was clear that something had been buried in this house, something that had festered for years, hidden beneath the surface. But Poirot knew one thing for certain. In order to uncover the truth, he would need to dig deeper into the past of Countess Talvikki. The answers were there, hidden in her life and her relationships, in the tangled web of love, obsession, and betrayal. Chapter 4. The Rival Portrait. The morning after his unsettling visit to the room with the portrait, Hercule Poirot was ready to delve deeper into the mystery that had begun to consume the mansion. The strange events that had occurred since Countess Talvikki's death were not simply the work of superstition. Poirot had gathered enough pieces of the puzzle to understand that the curse, if it could even be called that, was tied to something far more tangible and sinister. Marguerite, though still visibly shaken by the previous night's events, had agreed to lead Poirot to a secluded part of the mansion, a part of the house that was rarely visited by anyone. "My uncle has not allowed anyone to go there since my aunt's death," she explained quietly, as they made their way down a narrow corridor. "But if we are to understand what happened here, we must look into everything, especially the missing portrait." "Ah," Poirot said, raising an eyebrow. "The missing portrait. The one by de Leon, yes? That portrait, I believe, holds the key to unraveling everything." Marguerite gave him a troubled glance. "Yes, that one. It was said to have captured something darker than anyone realized." Poirot nodded, his mind already piecing together the fragments of the mystery. "Indeed, mademoiselle. It seems to me that this rival portrait by de Leon is not just a painting. It is the very core of your aunt's tragic life, and perhaps her death." They arrived at the door to a small locked room at the far end of the mansion. The door was old, its frame covered in thick dust, the wood creaking as Marguerite carefully unlocked it. As the door opened, a heavy silence filled the space, thick and oppressive. A room of secrets. The room beyond was smaller than Poirot expected, with shelves full of old portraits and framed works of art, many of which were covered with cloths to protect them from the dust. But it was the central piece of the room that immediately drew his attention. An easel, positioned near a large window, held a painting that had been covered with a faded sheet. Poirot approached it slowly, his steps deliberate. He could feel the weight of something significant in the air, a presence, almost. Marguerite stood in the doorway, nervously watching Poirot as he reached for the sheet. "That," she whispered, "is the portrait. The one that my aunt locked away. The one that Sebastien de Leon painted of her." Poirot lifted the cloth from the canvas with careful precision, revealing the portrait beneath. The painting was unlike anything Poirot had expected. Unlike the more formal depictions of Countess Talvikki he had seen before, this one was raw, intense. The Countess in the portrait was not simply posed, but seemed to be caught in a moment of deep reflection, her eyes wide and almost imploring, as if she were trying to convey something beyond words. Her expression was haunting, not the serene beauty of the earlier portraits, but something darker, more tragic. "What do you think, Poirot?" Marguerite asked, her voice barely audible. "Do you see it? The soul of my aunt, captured in this way? Is this what de Leon saw in her?" Poirot stood in front of the portrait, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. The brushstrokes were bold, expressive, as though the artist had poured every bit of his obsession into the work. The Countess's eyes, vivid and penetrating, seemed to follow him across the room. "Ah, mademoiselle," Poirot said slowly, "this is not a mere portrait. This is an invasion of the Countess's very being, her essence." He stepped back slightly, his mind racing. "This portrait, this is not about beauty. It is about something far darker. Sebastien de Leon sought to capture more than her outward form. He sought to capture her soul, and in doing so, he turned her into something other." Marguerite remained silent, watching Poirot carefully as he continued to examine the painting. "But why lock it away?" Poirot murmured, more to himself than to Marguerite. "Why did your aunt hide this portrait if it was merely an artistic expression?" Marguerite hesitated, then spoke with quiet sadness. "Because she feared it, Poirot. She feared that de Leon had captured something too deep, something beyond the surface of her beauty. It is said that after seeing this portrait, she became terrified of her own reflection. She believed it held a curse, a mark of something that could not be erased." Poirot considered her words carefully. "A curse? No, mademoiselle, this is not a curse. This is a reflection of human nature at its most obsessive and dangerous. What your aunt feared was not the portrait itself, but what it represented, her vulnerability, her loss of control over the image de Leon had created." He turned back to the portrait, studying the details more closely. "And this painting was hidden, locked away. Why?" Marguerite's voice wavered as she spoke. "My uncle, after my aunt's death, wanted to display it in the grand hall. He believed it was the crowning piece of her legacy, a testament to her beauty and mystery. But my aunt had already locked it away. I think she knew something that no one else did, that this portrait, in the wrong hands, could be more than just art. It could hold power. The connection to the present Poirot's sharp mind was already at work, piecing together the information. "Your aunt's death," he said, turning to Marguerite, "was not a simple matter. No, it was no accident. This portrait was part of something much larger, an obsession, a rivalry, a life filled with secrets." Marguerite nodded solemnly. "But the portrait is just the beginning. What happened after my aunt's death, the fire, the cold spots, the moving of the portrait into the grand hall, those events cannot be explained away so easily. I believe something has awakened here, something connected to the past." Poirot smiled slightly, though there was little humor in it. "Ah, mademoiselle, I do not believe in ghosts or curses, but I do believe in human emotions, in jealousy, in obsession, and in betrayal. The portrait has caused great distress, that much is clear. But the real cause of these strange events lies deeper." He turned back to the portrait, a final thought forming in his mind. "The portrait is a symbol of something much darker, something that was buried with the Countess's death. The emotions tied to it, the unresolved tensions, have not dissipated. They linger, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed." The unveiling of secrets. Poirot knew that to unravel the mystery of Countess Talvikki's death and the strange occurrences surrounding the portrait, he would have to dig into the relationships between the key players: Countess Talvikki, her husband, her niece, and of course, Sebastian de Leon. Each person had their own motives, their own secrets. But there was one thing that stood out above all else. The portrait was not just a work of art, it was a reflection of the Countess's true self, her soul, and the secrets she had kept hidden. That, Poirot realized, was the true danger. It was not the portrait itself, but what it revealed about the people connected to it. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, turning back to Marguerite, "I will uncover the truth about this portrait. But you must be prepared for what we may find. What is hidden in the shadows will come to light, and the truth, however painful, must be faced." Marguerite nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I am ready, Poirot. I have to know what happened to my aunt, to her legacy." Poirot gave a slight nod, a quiet promise. "Then, mademoiselle, we will begin where the truth lies. In the heart of this house, in the heart of the portrait itself." Chapter 5. The disappearance of Sebastian de Leon. The day had come to a close in the mansion, and the autumn dusk filled the air with a chilly reminder of the season. Poirot sat in the drawing room, the heavy curtains drawn to shield the room from the darkening sky. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, its warm glow casting flickering shadows on the walls, which were lined with portraits of former ancestors. All, it seemed, watching silently as the detective continued his work. Marguerite had returned to her rooms after their visit to the locked chamber, still visibly shaken. But a quiet determination had replaced the earlier uncertainty in her eyes. She trusted Poirot now, but her mind was still clouded with the unanswered questions about her aunt's life and death. And then there was the ever-present mystery of the portrait. Poirot had been mulling over the facts when a sudden knock on the door broke his thoughts. It was Marguerite, looking more agitated than before. "Poirot," she said breathlessly, "I need to speak with you. There's something you must know, something I've kept hidden for too long." Poirot gestured for her to sit, and she quickly joined him by the fire, her face pale in the warm glow of the flames. "What is it, mademoiselle?" Marguerite hesitated, then spoke with an urgency that revealed the weight of the secret she was about to share. "It's about Sébastien de Léon. My uncle told me something yesterday, something that I didn't understand at first, but now, after everything that's happened, I think it's important." Poirot leaned in, his interest piqued. "Go on, mademoiselle." The artist's final days. Marguerite's voice dropped to a whisper as she began to recount the events surrounding Sébastien de Léon's disappearance. Sébastien de Léon was once obsessed with my aunt. His obsession with her went beyond just his art. He was convinced that they were meant to be together, that her beauty was a sign that their fates were intertwined. But my aunt didn't feel the same way. Poirot's sharp eyes focused on her. "She rejected him then?" Marguerite nodded. "Yes, but it wasn't just rejection. She feared him. His obsession grew darker, more dangerous. At first, my uncle thought it was just another artist's infatuation, but over time, the lines between admiration and something more sinister blurred. De Léon began visiting the mansion frequently, sometimes without invitation. He would come unannounced, at odd hours, demanding to see my aunt." Poirot's fingers tapped thoughtfully on the armrest. "A man consumed by obsession, yes. And did he continue to create portraits of her?" "Not just portraits," Marguerite continued, her voice shaky. "He created a collection of paintings and sketches, each one more intimate than the last. It was as though he was trying to capture something that went beyond her image. And then, one day, the paintings stopped. He disappeared." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Disappeared, you say? Without a trace?" "Yes," Marguerite confirmed. "One day, he simply vanished. No one saw him again. My uncle had people search for him, but no one could find any trace of him, not even his studio or his belongings. It was as though he had never existed." "How strange," Poirot murmured. "A man so consumed by his obsession with your aunt, and then nothing. His disappearance was not just abrupt. It was as though he had erased himself from existence." The clue in the letters. Marguerite paused, her eyes distant as if she were reliving the moment. "The thing is, Poirot, my uncle found something strange in de Léon's studio shortly after he disappeared. My uncle went through the artist's papers, hoping to find some clue as to what had happened. And there, among his sketches, was a letter addressed to my aunt. It was a confession." "A confession?" Poirot asked. "Of what?" Marguerite hesitated before answering. "It was a confession of love, of course. But more than that, it was a confession of obsession. He wrote that he could no longer live without her, that he would do anything to make her his, even if it meant going to extremes. And then he mentioned the portrait, the one he had painted of her." Poirot's interest deepened. "The portrait, yes. It seems to be at the center of this mystery. Was there anything else in the letter?" Marguerite nodded slowly. "Yes. He spoke of a curse. He believed the portrait would bind her to him forever, that it would trap her essence and make her his for eternity. My uncle was the one who found the letter, but he never told anyone else about it. He burned it, hoping to rid himself of de Léon's memory." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A curse, you say? And yet your uncle did not speak of it to anyone else?" "No," Marguerite said softly. "He didn't. He believed it was just the ramblings of a madman, and yet he kept the secret. He never mentioned it to me or anyone else. But now, with everything that has been happening, I think it's possible that de Léon's obsession, his curse, might still be lingering in this house. Poirot stood up, his mind whirring as he processed this new information. The curse, yes. It seems that de Leon's obsession did not die with him. His influence, perhaps, still lingers, in the portrait and in the events that followed. The hidden truth. Poirot's mind raced as he pieced together the facts. De Leon had disappeared, leaving behind only his art, his obsession, and his twisted beliefs. His disappearance, though sudden, had left behind a trail of questions, the answers to which seemed to have evaded everyone, until now. "What if de Leon didn't disappear, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked suddenly, turning to Marguerite. "What if he faked his disappearance, leaving behind his last work, the portrait, as his final claim to your aunt? What if he is still here, in this house, in some form?" Marguerite looked at him, her face a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You mean, you think he could still be alive?" "I do not know, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice low. "But I do know this. De Leon's obsession with the portrait, with capturing your aunt's soul, goes far deeper than anyone realized. The portrait in his mind was the key to possessing her forever. And now, it seems, that obsession has turned into something much darker." Poirot paced the room, his thoughts spinning rapidly. What if de Leon's disappearance was not a disappearance at all? What if he staged it, perhaps even in connection with your aunt's death? The portrait was hidden away, but it seems it is the very thing that brings misfortune to this house. Perhaps de Leon's obsession has never truly ended. A new path. Poirot's deduction was clear now. The missing artist, the portrait, and the strange happenings were all connected, bound together by a web of obsession and betrayal. But the truth was still shrouded in mystery, and it was clear that in order to solve this case, Poirot would need to delve deeper into the history of de Leon and his final days. Turning to Marguerite, Poirot spoke with his usual calm authority. "Mademoiselle, I must investigate de Leon's disappearance further. I believe it holds the key to understanding what has happened here and what will happen next. I must speak to those who knew him, those who may have seen something that can shed light on his final moments." Marguerite nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I understand, Poirot. I'll do anything to help you uncover the truth." Poirot smiled reassuringly. "Together, mademoiselle, we shall uncover what has been hidden for far too long." As Poirot turned to leave the room, his thoughts were already on the next step of his investigation. There was much more to uncover, and de Leon's disappearance was just the beginning. Chapter 6. The Death of Countess Talvikki. The mansion had always seemed steeped in mystery, but as Poirot stood in the grand dining room the next morning, he felt that the walls were closing in. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but with every revelation came more questions. And with every question, the shadow of something more sinister loomed over the house. The portrait, the disappearance of Sébastien de Leon, the strange occurrences, they all seemed to point toward one thing: Countess Talvikki's untimely death. Poirot had examined every corner of the estate, but he knew that the heart of this mystery lay in the final moments of the Countess's life. He had heard the stories, the whispers about her tragic demise, but it was time to uncover the truth. Marguerite had led him to a quiet sitting room, the heavy curtains drawn tightly against the outside world. She was still haunted by the memories of her aunt's death, but now, with Poirot at her side, She seemed more determined to uncover the truth. "I never told you the full story of my aunt's death, Poirot," Marguerite began, her voice soft but filled with resolve. "I think it's time you heard it." Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "Please, mademoiselle, I am listening." The tragic night. Marguerite's voice faltered as she recalled the events of that fateful night. "It was just a few days before my aunt died. She had been acting strange, more distant than usual. She hardly left her room, and when she did, she would only speak of the portrait, of de Leon, and of fear." Poirot leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "Fear, you say? What kind of fear?" Marguerite paused, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was afraid of the portrait. She said it was watching her. She was terrified that de Leon's curse had taken root in her life, that she had become trapped in the very painting he had created of her. Poirot's mind whirred, but he said nothing, allowing Marguerite to continue. "My uncle, who had always been so supportive of her, started to become concerned too. He asked her what was wrong, why she was acting this way, but she wouldn't answer him directly. All she would say was that she was being haunted by something from her past that she couldn't escape." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing. "And then, mademoiselle, what happened next?" "The sudden illness." Marguerite took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "It was the night of her death. My uncle had gone to bed early, and I was in my room when I heard a loud crash. I rushed downstairs to find her in the hallway, lying on the floor, clutching her chest." Poirot's expression softened. "A heart attack, you believe?" Marguerite nodded. "Yes, the doctors said it was a heart attack. But there was something off about it, Poirot. The way she looked, the way she had been acting. It was as though something had broken inside her. She didn't just die from a sudden illness. I believe she was frightened to death." Poirot sat back, his mind working through the information. "Frightened to death," he repeated, as if testing the words on his tongue. "But why? What could have caused such fear?" Marguerite's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "The portrait, Poirot. It had become her prison. She believed that de Leon's curse had come true, that she was doomed to live in its shadow forever. The last thing she said before she died, 'It haunts me,' she said. 'The eyes. The eyes are watching me. I cannot escape.'" A pattern of events. Poirot sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on what Marguerite had shared. The suddenness of the Countess's death, the panic that preceded it, and the mention of the eyes. It all seemed connected. But what did it all mean? "Your aunt's death," Poirot said slowly. "Was it really a natural cause? Or do you believe something else played a part in it?" Marguerite looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion. I don't know, Poirot. It's hard to say. It was as though something was controlling her, manipulating her emotions, making her believe in the curse. But I can't help but wonder if the portrait had something to do with it. Or maybe Sébastien de Leon's influence still lingered, even after his disappearance. Poirot stroked his mustache thoughtfully, the wheels turning in his mind. "I believe your aunt's death was not as simple as it seems. The portrait, de Leon's obsession with her, and the curse she feared, they all seem to be linked. But the question is, who or what was behind it all?" The family secrets Poirot's investigation into the Countess's death had now taken a new direction. He had long suspected that there was more to the story than met the eye. The portrait, with its strange power and unnerving gaze, had a deep connection to the events surrounding her death. But what was it? And how was Sébastien de Léon involved? "Marguerite," Poirot said, his voice soft yet filled with authority, "I must ask you to think carefully. Were there any other events or people involved in your aunt's life that could have contributed to her fear? Any rivals, friends, or enemies she may have had? Anything that could have pushed her into such a state of terror?" Marguerite's face grew pale as she thought back to the details of her aunt's life. There was one person, a man who had been in and out of her life for years. His name was Henri Dufresne, a former lover of my aunt's. He was a talented sculptor, but he had a dark side, a jealousy that could turn violent. My aunt ended things with him after he became obsessed with her, much like de Léon. But I never knew if their relationship had truly ended. Henri was always lurking in the background, always watching. Poirot leaned forward, his interest piqued. "And what happened to this Henri Dufresne?" Marguerite's expression grew even darker. "He disappeared too. Shortly after my aunt's death, he vanished without a trace. No one knew where he went, but I remember my aunt mentioning him in the days leading up to her death. She said he was coming back, that he was watching her. I never believed her. I thought she was just imagining things. But now, I wonder if he was somehow involved." Poirot rose, his mind racing. "Mademoiselle, this man may be the key to understanding everything. His disappearance, his connection to your aunt, and the timing of it all. It is too coincidental." A deepening mystery. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching the door. He turned to see the butler, Mr. Fournier, standing in the doorway with a solemn expression. "Excuse me, Monsieur Poirot, Mademoiselle Marguerite," he said, bowing slightly. "There is something you must see. It concerns the estate and the portrait." Poirot's interest was immediately piqued. "What is it, Mr. Fournier?" "Speak quickly." The butler's face was grave as he stepped into the room. "It seems there is a hidden room, Monsieur Poirot. A room that no one knew about until just recently. It was discovered when some of the estate's old servants were cleaning the attic. They found a box containing more of de Léon's sketches. And one of them, Monsieur Poirot, was a sketch of the Countess, but it is unlike any other. The eyes are different, more alive." Poirot turned to Marguerite, his mind racing. "A sketch of the Countess, more alive than ever? Mr. Fournier, take me to this room. We must see it at once." Conclusion of Chapter 6. As Poirot followed Mr. Fournier down the winding corridors of the mansion, his mind swirled with questions. The portrait, the disappearance of Sébastien de Léon, the strange events in the house. They were all connected by a thread that seemed to lead to one terrifying conclusion. The Countess had been haunted, not just by the portrait, but by the shadows of her past, the dark figures who had surrounded her. And now, with de Léon's final sketch, it seemed that the mystery of her death was far from over. Poirot knew that what awaited him in that hidden room would reveal the final, shocking truth. As the door to the hidden room creaked open, Poirot's heart raced. This was the moment when everything would be laid bare. Chapter 7. The Hidden Room and the Final Sketch. The hidden room was nothing more than a small, unremarkable space tucked away in the farthest corner of the mansion's attic. The door was concealed behind a stack of old furniture, so well hidden that even the house's long-time staff had been unaware of its existence. The discovery had been purely accidental when the estate's cleaning staff had begun sorting through the attic's forgotten contents. Poirot followed Mr. Fournier and Marguerite up the creaking staircase, his mind racing. He had long suspected that the truth behind Countess Talvikki's death and the eerie happenings surrounding the portrait would lead him to something hidden in the depths of the mansion. The air in the attic was stale, thick with dust, and it carried a scent of mothballs and aged paper. But despite the neglect of the space, Poirot could sense that the answers he sought were close at hand. As they approached the hidden room, Mr. Fournier, with an air of reverence, pushed open the door. Inside, the walls were lined with old trunks and forgotten furniture. But in the center of the room, under a faded, moth-eaten cloth, was a small wooden box. The box was locked, but it had clearly been opened before. A sense of urgency rippled through the air as Mr. Fournier reached for it, carefully lifting the lid to reveal its contents. The box was filled with sketches. Some were rough drafts, others more polished, all depicting the Countess in various poses, some serene, some fraught with emotion. But it was one sketch in particular that caught Poirot's attention. The sketch was unmistakably of Countess Talvikki. But this was no ordinary portrait. The Countess's eyes in the drawing seemed to pulse with life. They were not merely lifeless depictions of her beauty, as in the other portraits. These eyes seemed to be staring right back at him, alive, haunting, a gaze that followed him as he moved. Poirot felt a strange chill run down his spine. The power of the sketch. Marguerite stepped closer to Poirot, her eyes wide with disbelief. This is the sketch I was telling you about," she whispered. "The one my uncle found. It's as if de Leon captured something more than just her likeness. The eyes. Poirot, they're different. They're not just her eyes. They're alive." Poirot took a long, deliberate look at the sketch. The Countess's face was painted with delicate detail, but it was the eyes, wide, dark, and intense, that seemed to convey a sense of torment, as if they held some unspoken secret. "The portrait," Poirot said quietly, "wasn't just a representation of her. It was an attempt to capture something much darker, the very essence of the Countess's soul. But this sketch," he murmured, "is something else entirely. It is as though de Leon knew that he could not simply capture her beauty. He needed to capture something deeper, something that, in the wrong hands, could bring ruin." Marguerite stepped back, her face pale. "Do you think de Leon could have known something, that he foresaw her death, or that he somehow caused it?" Poirot shook his head, deep in thought. It is clear that de Leon was obsessed with the Countess, but whether his obsession led him to create something beyond art, something that could curse her, remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, mademoiselle. This sketch, this drawing, it holds the key to understanding what truly happened to your aunt. A deeper connection. Poirot studied the sketch further, noting the meticulous attention to detail in the Countess's eyes. There was something unsettling about the way the eyes were drawn. They were too vivid, too intense, as though they held a depth that no ordinary portrait should possess. It wasn't just an artistic skill that de Leon had possessed. It was an obsession, a need to capture more than just the external form, to delve deeper into the Countess's psyche, her soul. But why? Poirot murmured aloud, almost to himself. Why did de Leon create such a piece? Was he trying to control her, to bind her in some way? Marguerite, visibly shaken, spoke again. "You've said before that this house is full of secrets, Poirot. Is it possible that Sebastien de Leon knew something that led to my aunt's death? Perhaps the curse he spoke of wasn't just superstition. Perhaps he had found a way to make her life his for eternity." Poirot turned to her, his mind already racing through the possibilities. "It is clear that de Leon's obsession with your aunt was not a simple infatuation. He sought to possess her in a way that went beyond love. This sketch, this is a representation of his power over her. He was trying to capture her spirit, her essence. And it seems he succeeded, in a sense. The portrait, and now this sketch, show that he left behind more than just art. He left a trace of his influence on her." Poirot paused, his thoughts catching up with the overwhelming implications of his deductions. The portrait was not simply a painting, it was a vessel. "And perhaps, mademoiselle, your aunt did not die from a simple illness. Perhaps it was the portrait that killed her, the weight of de Leon's obsession, transferred through his art. The curse revealed." Poirot stood up, his mind clearer than ever. "Your aunt's fear was not misplaced, mademoiselle. She feared what de Leon had done to her soul. The portrait, the sketch, they were not just images of her beauty. They were symbols of his control, his power over her. And it seems that power has not waned with his disappearance." He turned to Mr. Fournier, who had remained silent, watching Poirot's every move. "Mr. Fournier, did anyone else know about this sketch? Did your uncle know about it?" The butler nodded solemnly. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. My uncle found it in de Leon's studio, along with other unfinished works. He recognized the Countess immediately, but it was the eyes that troubled him. He locked it away, just like the portrait, for fear that it might cause harm. But my uncle never spoke of it to anyone else. He never shared it with anyone except me." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Your uncle believed in the power of this sketch, but he kept it hidden. He knew something about de Leon's intentions that he could not face. This sketch was never meant to be seen, not by anyone. A man's legacy." As Poirot turned to leave the room, he paused at the door, a thought lingering in his mind. "Mademoiselle, I believe Sebastien de Leon's disappearance was not as simple as it appeared. His obsession with your aunt did not end with his death. No, I believe that de Leon's influence lives on. In the portrait, in the sketch, and in the mansion itself." Marguerite looked at Poirot, a mix of fear and disbelief in her eyes. "Do you think de Leon's spirit is haunting this house?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, mademoiselle. It is not the spirit of de Leon that haunts this house. It is his legacy, his obsession, that lingers. And it is that obsession that has corrupted everything it touched. The portrait, the sketch, the strange events in the house. They are all part of the same curse. But it is not a curse of the supernatural. It is a curse of human nature. Obsession, possessiveness, and the desire to control." Poirot turned back to the room, his eyes lingering on the sketch one last time. "The truth is here, mademoiselle. And once we uncover it, we will finally understand what happened to your aunt and why de Leon's legacy still casts its shadow over this house." Chapter 8. The Last Confession. The mansion, though full of life and history, had grown quiet in the aftermath of the revelations Poirot had uncovered. Every room, every shadow seemed to carry with it a weight, a sense that the past was clawing its way into the present, refusing to be forgotten. Countess Talvikki's death, the portrait, and Sébastien de Léon's obsessive legacy had become entwined in a knot that Poirot could feel tightening around the mansion with every passing moment. Poirot had spent hours combing through the mansion's records and speaking with those who had known the Countess, yet the pieces were still not coming together. Marguerite's memories and the accounts of Mr. Fournier, though illuminating, still left too many gaps. That evening, Poirot retired to the grand study once more, his thoughts swirling. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, the only sound in the room besides his steady breathing. He had been on the cusp of something all along, a hidden truth buried beneath layers of secrecy. But the final link was still missing. The door creaked open, and Poirot turned to find Marguerite standing in the doorway. Her face was drawn, her eyes filled with determination. She had been keeping to herself for the last few hours, perhaps reflecting on the weight of the mystery that had been thrust upon her. But there was something in her demeanor now, a quiet resolution. "Poirot," she said, her voice steady, "I know what I have to do. I need to tell you everything, no matter how painful it may be." Poirot sat forward, his attention fixed on her. "You have something more to tell me, mademoiselle? Please, continue." The hidden truth. Marguerite stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She took a deep breath before speaking again, her voice a little steadier this time. "I've been keeping a secret, Poirot. A secret about my aunt's death. I thought that if I ignored it, if I buried it like everyone else did, it would disappear. But it hasn't. It has lingered, just as the portrait and the curse have lingered. It's all connected." Poirot remained silent, waiting for her to continue. He could sense that she was on the verge of something important, something that might shed light on the final piece of the puzzle. "I knew about the affair between my aunt and Sébastien de Léon," Marguerite said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew about their relationship long before I was told. It was a secret she kept from everyone, from my uncle, from me, from everyone who knew her. She told me once, when I was younger. She said it was a fleeting thing, a mistake that had been made in the past. But I think it was more than that." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "More than a fleeting mistake, you say? Tell me, mademoiselle, what did your aunt truly believe? What did she say about de Léon's influence over her?" Marguerite lowered her eyes, clearly struggling with the weight of the memory. "She said he had consumed her life. She never spoke of him in a loving way. In fact, I believe she grew to resent him. But there was something about him, Poirot, something she couldn't escape. She was afraid of him, and it was that fear, I think, that led to her eventual breakdown." Poirot leaned forward, his sharp mind racing through the information. "You said earlier that de Léon had disappeared, that no one knew where he went. But what if he didn't disappear, mademoiselle? What if he never left?" Marguerite's eyes widened as she looked at Poirot. "You mean, you think he's still here? That he never truly left the mansion?" Poirot nodded slowly, his voice calm yet filled with certainty. "I do not believe de Léon disappeared at all. I believe he staged his disappearance, that he left behind more than just his art. He left behind his obsession. and I think that obsession never truly ended. The portrait, the curse, it was all part of his final plan, and I believe he is still connected to this house. The unfinished letter. Marguerite's face paled as she considered Poirot's words. What are you suggesting, Poirot? That he's still alive? That he faked his death? Poirot shook his head, his expression firm. I do not know, mademoiselle. But there is something that has not yet been revealed. A final piece of the puzzle. Your uncle, I believe, knows more than he has let on. He was the one who found the letter. Was he not? The letter from de Leon? Marguerite's face contorted with discomfort. Yes, but it was never read aloud. My uncle, he burned it. He told me that it was too dangerous to keep, that the contents were too disturbing. Poirot's eyes lit up with realization. And yet, you have never read it. You do not know what it said. Marguerite bit her lip, conflicted. No, I never did. It was too painful to think about. I thought it was just the ravings of a madman. But now I think my uncle was trying to protect me. Poirot stood and moved toward the desk, where a small drawer was partially open. He reached for the letter inside, the one Marguerite had spoken of, the one that had been hidden for so long. Mademoiselle, I believe this letter is the final piece we need. If your uncle burned the rest, this is the only part that remains. We must read it to understand de Leon's final intentions. Marguerite's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and hope. If you think it will help, Poirot. But I warn you, the truth may be more than we can bear. Poirot unfolded the yellowed parchment and began to read aloud. The handwriting was frantic, filled with a desperation that seemed to bleed through the words. The confession. Dearest Talvikki, Poirot read, I can no longer live with the thought of you slipping away from me, of you fading into the life of another man. You are mine, and I will not let you go. I have painted you. I have captured you. But you will never be free. The portrait I've created of you, the one that you fear, is only the beginning. I will bind you to me forever. Through it, through my art. Your eyes will follow me, and you will never escape. I have made sure of it. Poirot paused, his voice trembling slightly, as he continued. I know you will try to hide from me, Talvikki, but you cannot. Not anymore. The curse that I have placed upon you will keep you here, with me. Even death will not free you. I will come for you, and you will be mine. Poirot stopped reading, his hands trembling as he placed the letter back on the desk. The silence in the room was deafening as the gravity of the words sunk in. The final revelation. Marguerite stared at the letter, her face pale with shock. This is what de Leon meant. The curse he spoke of wasn't just superstition. He believed that he could bind my aunt to him forever, even beyond death. Poirot's voice was grave. Yes, mademoiselle, this was no ordinary artist's obsession. Sebastien de Leon believed that through his art, he could trap the very essence of Countess Talvikki. And, in a sense, he succeeded. The portrait was not just a painting, it was a prison, a means of control. Marguerite's voice trembled with emotion. But why? Why did he do this to her? Why did he believe that he had the right to take control of her life and her death? Poirot looked at her, his gaze soft but determined. The answer, mademoiselle, lies in the depth of human obsession. De Leon was consumed by his love for your aunt, and when he realized that she would never be his, he sought to possess her in a way that went beyond life itself. The portrait was his final attempt to capture her soul, But it was more than just art. It was a curse that lived on after he disappeared. Marguerite nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek. So, it wasn't just the portrait that caused her death. It was him, his obsession, his curse that followed her, even to the end. Poirot nodded. Yes, mademoiselle. It was de Leon's influence, his obsession, that caused her death. It was not a heart attack. It was fear. Fear of being trapped forever in his grip. Chapter 9. The Web of Secrets Unraveled. The revelation that Sébastien de Leon's obsession had led to Countess Talvikki's death had shaken both Poirot and Marguerite to the core. The portrait, which had once been a symbol of the Countess's beauty, had become a symbol of her entrapment, her soul bound by de Leon's twisted desire for control. But while Poirot had uncovered much, there were still pieces of the puzzle that needed to be fit together. The portrait was not the only object of obsession. De Leon's final days, his influence on those around him, and the fate of the mansion itself were still unexplained. The mansion, with its heavy air and centuries-old walls, seemed to echo with the weight of its secrets. Poirot stood at the edge of the grand staircase, his gaze drifting over the estate as he pondered his next move. It was clear now that the mystery was far deeper than anyone had realized. De Leon's curse was not just a lingering presence. It had spread throughout the house and had affected everyone involved. Marguerite, her face pale but determined, approached him with a somber expression. "Poirot," she said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "We can't ignore the fact that my uncle is somehow involved in all of this. He knows more than he's letting on. I believe he's been hiding something. He's kept so many things from me. Things that could explain what really happened." Poirot turned to her, his brow furrowed. "You are right, mademoiselle. Your uncle has been a central figure in this case. He knew of the portrait's power, the letter, and yet he did not reveal the full truth to anyone. He has been protecting his own interests, but I believe there is more at stake here than just his reputation." Marguerite nodded. "I've always been loyal to my uncle, Poirot, but I can no longer ignore the fact that he has kept these secrets from me. Secrets that may explain not only my aunt's death, but the strange occurrences in this house." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Then it is time, mademoiselle, for us to confront your uncle. We cannot solve this mystery unless we learn everything he knows. His silence may be the final key to unlocking the truth." The confrontation. The study where Marguerite's uncle, Count Talvikki, spent most of his time was a large, dark room lined with bookshelves and ornate furniture. It had the air of a man who was both a collector and a scholar, someone who had spent his life amassing knowledge, but also one who had spent too much time in the shadows, hiding from the past. Poirot and Marguerite entered the room, the tension between them palpable. The Count, an elderly man with graying hair and a once vibrant demeanor, now dulled by age, was seated behind his large desk. He looked up as they entered, his eyes betraying nothing. "Ah, Poirot," he said, his voice low and measured. "I assume you've come to a conclusion about the events that have taken place here. What do you believe?" Poirot wasted no time. "Count Talvikki, I believe you know more than you have let on. You knew about the portrait, about the letter, and you certainly knew about Sébastien de Leon's obsession with your wife. And yet, you kept these things from your niece, your family, and from me." The Count's expression remained stoic, but Poirot could see the flicker of guilt in his eyes. "You misunderstand me, Poirot. I did what I thought was best to protect Marguerite, to protect this family. The portrait was a dangerous thing, a thing that should never have been displayed. When I found the letter, I knew I had to keep it from her. I believed it would only cause harm." Poirot took a step forward, his tone unyielding. "You are protecting her, yes, but you are also protecting yourself, aren't you? You knew the truth about your wife's death, and you hid it. You allowed this house to be cursed by your silence, by your inaction." The Count's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them on the desk. "I didn't want Marguerite to know the truth. I wanted her to live without the weight of the curse on her shoulders. I thought if I kept the secrets hidden, it would protect her from what was inevitable." Marguerite's voice broke through the silence, sharp and filled with frustration. "You never told me. You never told me about De Leon, about the curse, about any of this. Why, uncle, why didn't you tell me?" The Count looked away, his face a mask of guilt and regret. "Because I was afraid, Marguerite. Afraid that you would think I had failed your mother. I failed her by letting De Leon into our lives. I failed her by not seeing the danger before it was too late. And then, when your aunt died, I couldn't bear to confront it. I thought if I kept the past buried, it would stay buried." Poirot crossed his arms, his voice calm but firm. "But that is the problem, Count. The past does not stay buried. It always resurfaces. And now it is this very silence, this refusal to confront the truth, that has left this house in torment." The final connection. The Count's shoulders slumped in resignation, the weight of the years pressing down on him. "You're right, Poirot. The truth should have been revealed long ago. My wife's death. It wasn't a heart attack. It wasn't just a tragic accident. It was De Leon's obsession, his curse, that killed her. And I failed to stop it." Poirot's mind clicked into place, the pieces finally coming together. "The portrait," he said quietly, "was more than just a painting. It was a vessel of De Leon's obsession and a means for him to control your wife. The curse he spoke of was not supernatural, Count. It was psychological. A man's obsession transferred through his art until it consumed her entirely." Marguerite's eyes filled with understanding. "So, you knew. You knew that the portrait wasn't just a work of art, but a way for De Leon to hold my aunt captive, even after death?" The Count nodded, his voice a whisper. "Yes, I knew. And when she died, I thought I had lost her forever. But the portrait, the eyes, they stayed with me. I could still feel her watching me, even after she was gone." Poirot turned to the Count, his expression resolute. "And you moved the portrait into the center of the house, thinking that it would be an honor to your wife. But you never realized that the portrait was never meant to honor her. It was meant to trap her. And now, that curse, that obsession, has carried on through this house, through your family. The unraveling of the curse." Poirot's voice was soft, but filled with finality. "The portrait must be destroyed, Count. It is the only way to break the chain of obsession that has plagued this family. You must confront the past, not by hiding it, but by facing it head-on. Only then will your family be free." Marguerite looked at her uncle, her face filled with sorrow. "Uncle, I didn't know. I didn't know any of this, but I want to help you. We can destroy the portrait, and we can break the curse together." The Count looked at his niece, his eyes filled with guilt and regret. I've made so many mistakes, Marguerite. But perhaps it's not too late to make things right." Poirot turned towards the door, his mind already planning the next steps. "We must take action quickly. The longer the portrait stays here, the more power it has. It is time to end this, once and for all." Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The mansion, once filled with lingering fear and oppressive secrets, now stood in an eerie quiet, as though it were holding its breath. The weight of its dark past had not fully lifted, but the storm of confusion and obsession was slowly coming to a close. Hercule Poirot, having uncovered the twisted layers of the mystery surrounding Countess Talvikki's death, her cursed portrait, and the destructive obsession of Sebastien de Leon, knew that the final step was imminent. The portrait had to be destroyed, and with it, the lingering curse. The Count, now fully aware of his complicity in allowing the curse to fester, had agreed with Poirot's plan to end it all. His remorse was evident in his weary eyes, but the willingness to face the truth had finally come. Marguerite, though shaken by the revelations, stood by her uncle's side, ready to break free from the haunting legacy that had defined her family for far too long. They gathered in the grand hall, the heart of the mansion. The portrait of Countess Talvikki, which had once held such power over them all, now seemed like a mere relic, a thing of the past, its grip no longer as strong as it had once been. The mansion felt quieter now, as though the very walls were waiting for the end of this long, painful chapter. The destruction of the portrait Poirot stood in front of the portrait, his sharp gaze fixed on it. The Count and Marguerite stood behind him, their faces set with grim determination. The portrait, with its unnerving eyes and dark presence, had become a symbol of more than just de Leon's obsession. It had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in their lives. It had been a trap, a prison, and it had to be destroyed. "Is this truly the only way, Poirot?" Marguerite asked softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "To destroy it completely?" Poirot turned to her, his expression calm, yet filled with understanding. "Yes, mademoiselle. The portrait is not just a painting, it is a part of your family's curse. To rid yourselves of it, you must face the truth and destroy it, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Only then will the chain of obsession be broken." The Count stepped forward, his face drawn with the weight of his actions. "I have failed my family, Poirot, but I will not fail her now. I will do what must be done." He reached out, his hands trembling as he grasped the edges of the portrait's frame. The room seemed to hold its breath as the final moment approached. Poirot's voice broke the silence. "Before you proceed, Count, let us take one final look at the portrait, not with fear or obsession, but with the resolve to move forward. This is the last time it will have power over us." For a moment, Poirot, Marguerite, and the Count stood in front of the portrait. The Countess's eyes, though still haunting, no longer held the same power. They were simply a depiction, a work of art. Nothing more. Poirot nodded. "Now, Count, it is time." With a deep breath, the Count pulled the portrait from the wall and, with Marguerite at his side, walked toward the fireplace. The flames crackled, casting a warm glow over the room as the portrait was placed in the fire. The wood and canvas blackened and twisted as the fire consumed it, until, in moments, it was nothing but ash. The unraveling of the past. As the last remnants of the portrait burned away, a strange sense of release filled the room. The tension that had gripped the mansion for so long seemed to lift, and the air itself felt lighter, as if the house had been freed from a long-held burden. The eyes of the Countess were no longer watching, no longer following their every move. The curse had been broken. Marguerite stood in silence, watching the flames dance, her hand resting on her uncle's shoulder. For the first time in many years, she felt a sense of peace, a sense that the shadows of the past had finally been dispelled. The truth, no matter how painful, had been revealed, and with it, the power of the portrait had been destroyed. Poirot watched them both, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You are free now, mademoiselle. And your family is free too. The obsession that once held you all in its grip has been broken." Marguerite nodded, her eyes moist with the weight of her emotions. "Thank you, Poirot. You've given us the truth, and in doing so, you've given us a future." Poirot gave her a reassuring smile, but his expression remained thoughtful. "The truth, mademoiselle, can be a difficult thing to face, but it is the only way to truly be free. Once the past is no longer hidden, it has no power over us. A new beginning." As Poirot prepared to leave the mansion, he paused by the door and turned to the Count and Marguerite. "I trust that with time, you will both find peace here. The house may be old, but it is not beyond repair. It will take effort, but it can be rebuilt, both in structure and in spirit." The Count nodded slowly. "We will rebuild, Poirot, and we will do so with the knowledge that we have faced the past and conquered it. I will make sure that this mansion no longer holds any secrets." Marguerite smiled, a small but genuine smile, as she looked at Poirot. "Thank you, Poirot, for everything." Poirot inclined his head. "It is I who should thank you, mademoiselle. You have faced the hardest truth, and you have emerged stronger for it." With that, Poirot turned and left the mansion, his footsteps echoing through the grand hall one final time. As he walked through the grounds, the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the estate. It was a new day, a day free from the shadows of obsession and fear. Poirot knew that while the mansion's mystery had been solved, there were always more puzzles to solve, more questions to answer. But for now, he could rest easy, knowing that this particular chapter had come to a close. The final reflection. As Poirot's silhouette faded into the distance, the mansion stood in quiet reflection. The past was no longer haunting its walls. The curse had been broken, and the portrait, once a symbol of dark obsession, was now nothing but a memory. Countess Talvikki's legacy, though marred by tragedy, could now be rewritten, not as a tale of possession and fear, but as a story of liberation. And though the portrait of Countess Talvikki no longer hung in the grand hall, its final lesson remained. Obsession could destroy, but truth, however painful, would always set them free.